Rosa was the 10th housekeeper this month, and Edward was ready to fire her by sunset. The 9 before her had failed to adhere to his ironclad rules, and Edward had no reason to believe Rosa would be any different. "Explain yourself," he said, his voice low and curt. "I danced with your daughter," Rosa said simply. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. "Why?" The question finally came, almost a growl. "Because I saw something in her, a spark," Rosa replied, her voice steady. "I put on a song." Her fingers twitched. She was following the beat, so I moved with her. Just a few minutes earlier, a last-minute cancelled meeting had brought Edward Grant, CEO of Grant Technologies, home earlier than expected. If not for this chance event, Edward would have missed everything. Rosa, the new housekeeper, was dancing gently with Nora, his daughter, who had been paralyzed from the waist down and hadn't spoken a word in nearly 3 years, not since her mother's death. And yet now, she was following Rosa's every move with a look of utter concentration, and from the very lips that had been silent, a faint tune was humming. Edward stared at this stranger, doubt and a flicker of hope, he thought long dead, warred in his eyes. "You are not a therapist, Rosa," he began, his voice like ice. "You are not trained, you are not authorized to touch my daughter." Rosa stood quietly near the door, her hands still clasped gently in front of her apron. She didn't offer a defense, just waited. Her silence only fueled his anger. "You could have undone years of therapy," he muttered, his voice strained with the desperation he always kept hidden. "There are structures, scientific protocols." He spun around, his sharp eyes boring into her. "Do you have any idea how much I've paid for her care? Have you listened to what the best specialists have to say?" Only then did Rosa speak, her voice slow and calm. "Mr. Grant, I have listened, but they see Nora as a collection of symptoms. They didn't see what I saw today." She took a step forward, her gaze unwavering, that spark in her eyes. "Nora chose to follow me, not because of a physical therapy exercise, but because her soul wanted to. She was listening to the music." Edward felt the defensive walls he'd built with money and logic begin to crack. Not because he agreed, but because he was utterly baffled. This didn't follow any formula he knew. "You think a dance can fix trauma? That a few twirls can erase 3 years of silence?" His voice cracked, revealing the wound beneath the billionaire's armor. Rosa didn't answer the question directly. She knew it wasn't her place to argue medicine, and doing so would miss the more important truth. Instead, she offered a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of a silent accusation. "I danced because I wanted to make Nora smile," she said softly. "Because in this house, it seems everyone has forgotten that she still can." The words struck him harder than any physical blow. Edward's fist tightened on the tabletop, his knuckles turning white. He had provided Nora with the very best of everything, but a smile. When was the last time he had even thought of that? "You crossed a line," he said, the words a struggle, but they had lost their threat. Rosa looked directly at him, and this time her eyes held not just calm, but compassion and a frightening clarity. "Mr. Grant, you've spent millions trying to fix her." Her voice was still quiet, but each word echoed in the vast, empty luxury of the room. "But have you ever tried listening to her soul? Have you ever truly seen her?" Rosa's questions hung in the air, not as an accusation, but as a raw, undeniable truth. Edward didn't answer. He couldn't. His gaze flickered to Nora, who was still looking at Rosa with a trust he had never received. Edward did not fire Rosa. He decided to let her stay. Later that night, after the entire house had fallen silent, Rosa stood alone in the grand living room, silver moonlight spilling through the window, turning the polished floor into a liquid pool. She looked at her own reflection. On a subconscious impulse, she rose softly onto her toes, her arms lifting, attempting a basic ballet position. Instantly, a sharp, familiar, and cruel pain shot up from her ankle. Her face contorted, and she had to quickly grab the arm of a chair to keep from buckling. She bent down, her hand gently rubbing a faint scar. Her gaze drifted toward the hallway leading to Nora's room. A profound sadness flickered across her face, only to be quickly replaced by a gentle determination. In the days that followed, Rosa didn't do anything complicated. She simply hummed old melodies and spoke to Nora as if the girl had always been listening, and small things began to happen. Nora's eyes, once vacant, now followed Rosa's form as she moved about the room. Then came the slow blinks when Rosa spoke, like a silent reply. The culmination was a small smile, the first in years, that flickered across Nora's lips when she saw Rosa enter the room. Edward witnessed it all. To him, these small signs were more significant than any expensive therapy. He understood that his daughter was still in there, and Rosa, in some impossibly simple way, was calling her back. But why could an ordinary housekeeper succeed where top specialists had failed? The answer began to reveal itself late one night, not from a report, but from an image on a security monitor. Edward was in his office, reviewing the day's footage, an old, controlling habit he couldn't break. He saw Rosa, after making sure Nora was fast asleep, standing alone in the middle of the moonlit living room. She wasn't cleaning, she just stood motionless for a long time. Then, slowly, almost unconsciously, one of her arms rose, tracing a perfect, fluid arc through the air. It was a gesture of breathtaking grace, a movement that carried the memory of 1,000 hours of grueling practice. That elegant but unfinished movement was the key. It was the piece that didn't fit the puzzle. An ordinary housekeeper doesn't move like that. His suspicion, now a driving force, led him to a place he had avoided for 3 years. Lillian's old studio. The room was untouched, covered in a thin layer of dust. His eyes swept over the canvases, the stacks of art books, and stopped on an old wooden box on a shelf. He opened it. Inside were his wife's keepsakes, concert tickets, old photographs, and a few performance programs. He flipped through a thick, yellowed ballet program, and then his heart stopped. On the cover, under the stage lights, was a dancer captured in a breathtaking leap, and beneath the image, the words, "Principal Dancer, Rosa Serrano." He hastily turned the next pages. A backstage photograph fell out. In it, Lillian had her arm thrown around the dancer, both of them beaming. It was Rosa, his housekeeper. All the pieces suddenly slammed into place, shrouded in questions. Why would a famous ballet dancer disguise herself as a housekeeper? What was her motive? A sense of betrayal and a vague dread washed over him. The next day, in Edward's office, the air was stretched taut. Rosa stood before his desk, assuming she had been summoned for a report on Nora's progress. Edward said nothing. He simply slid the ballet program and the photograph across the desk. Rosa saw them. The color drained from her face, her usual composure shattering, replaced by a look of grim resignation. She knew she'd been caught. "I'm not going to ask why you lied on your application," Edward began, his voice cold and sharp. "I just want to know one thing. Who are you, and why are you really here?" Rosa took a deep breath and lifted her chin, her eyes no longer holding any deference. "My name is Rosa Serrano," she said clearly. "I was a dancer, and I was Lillian's best friend." The name Lillian, spoken from Rosa's lips, made Edward flinch. It wasn't said casually. It was intimate. It carried memory. "We met during an art project," Rosa continued, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "Lillian painted, and I danced. She said my dancing gave her paintings a soul. I thought her soul was the most brilliant, vibrant thing I'd ever known." She looked down at her hands, the long, slender fingers of a dancer, now accustomed to the work of a housekeeper. "My career ended after a severe injury. The stage went dark for me, but our friendship didn't." Silence filled the room, broken only by Edward's heavy breathing. This woman wasn't a stranger. She was a part of his wife's past, a part he never knew existed. So, Edward tried to connect the dots. his voice still cold but now laced with an undeniable confusion. "After all that, you came here for money?" "No," Rosa cut in, her voice sharper now. "I didn't come for money, and I didn't come to deceive you," she said, her voice beginning to tremble with suppressed emotion. "I came here to keep a promise." "A promise," Edward repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "You expect me to believe a story like that? A famous dancer gives up everything to become a housekeeper because of a promise." "I didn't give up everything," Rosa said, her gaze drifting to the window, as if looking out at a stage that had long gone dark. "It took me a long time to get back on my feet. When I heard about Lillian and about Nora, I knew what I had to do. I deliberately sought a way to get close to you and Nora. I knew with a dancer's resume, you'd never hire me. So, I became a housekeeper, invisible. It was the only way I could get in here, to be near her." The raw truth of her confession left Edward speechless. His logic was screaming that this was absurd, but his heart felt a faint stirring. "What was the promise, Rosa?" he asked, his voice softer now, stripped of its accusation, left with only bewilderment. Rosa turned back to him, her voice crystal clear, as if she were reciting a sacred last wish. "Lillian always believed in the healing power of art. She believed the body could express what words could not. She knew dancing was my soul, and she wanted it to be a part of Nora's." Her eyes grew distant, the memory washed over her, as vivid as if it were yesterday. The studio, late afternoon. Rosa, drenched in sweat, was sitting on the floor, stretching her exhausted legs. Beside her, Lillian, in simple practice clothes, was fiddling with a long sea-blue silk ribbon, a strange, pensive look in her eyes. "You're a hurricane on the dance floor, Rosa," Lillian said, breaking the silence, but her smile wasn't as bright as usual. "And you're a daydreamer with that ribbon," Rosa teased back, wincing at a slight pain in her ankle. "What's on your mind today? You look a million miles away." Lillian sighed, her gaze fixed on the ribbon in her hands, not on Rosa. "I just came back from a checkup," she said softly. "The doctor said it's nothing serious, just that I need to be more careful. It got me thinking, just wondering." She turned, her expression suddenly serious. "Rosa, can I ask you for something really important?" Rosa stopped stretching, sensing the shift in her friend's tone. "Of course. What is it?" "When I have a bad feeling," she said. "Rosa, if anything ever happens to me, find Nora. Don't let her grow up in silence. Use this ribbon, teach her to dance, teach her how to let the sadness out." Rosa was stunned. "Lillian, what are you talking about? Nothing's going to happen." "Promise me," Lillian insisted, gripping Rosa's hand, her own trembling slightly. "Promise me you won't leave her alone." Looking into her friend's tear-filled eyes, Rosa gave a slow nod. "I promise." Rosa's promise echoed in the office, a legacy of love and art that Edward had deliberately buried along with his grief. He stumbled back, his mind reeling, trying to force this unbelievable truth into some kind of logical order. "Healing?" Edward finally spoke, his voice dripping with the sarcasm of a man beaten down by harsh reality. "You think a dance can mend a damaged spine or erase the memory of a death?" He pointed a finger at the stacks of medical reports on his desk. "This is reality, Rosa. Numbers, analysis, not fairy tales." It was his last line of defense, cold, hard logic. But Rosa didn't back down. She stepped closer, and for the first time, Edward saw not sympathy in her eyes, but a powerful challenge. "Lillian knew you'd say that," she replied, her voice calm but sharp. "She once told me you were a man of logic and numbers, a man who builds the future but forgets how to live in the present." Every word was a dagger to his memory. Edward froze. Rosa looked him straight in the eye, her own reflecting the image of a powerful but lonely man. She was afraid, she stressed, that if one day she wasn't here, you would use those numbers and protocols to build a wall around yourself and Nora, that you would forget that life also has music and dance. That grief can't be analyzed. It has to be felt and then released. Edward's wall of ice began to crack under the weight of the truth. You gave Nora the best doctors, the most expensive therapies, Rosa continued, her voice now carrying the weight of a last will. But you tried to fix her like a broken machine, forgetting that there was a soul inside, crying for help. I'm not here to fix her body, Mr. Grant. I'm here to remind you, and to save the one thing Lillian entrusted to me, the one thing your money could never touch, Nora's soul. Every one of Rosa's words pulled him back into their memories from years ago. Lillian, in a floral dress, beaming, trying to pull his hand away from his laptop, the jazz music she loved, playing softly in the background. Just one dance, Edward, the work can wait. Her hand was soft, warm, but he had brushed it away, his eyes never leaving the screen full of numbers. I'm busy. His voice had been so distant then, as if he were speaking to a stranger, not his wife. How many times had he said that? I'm busy. Later. I need to finish this. The numb silence that had paralyzed his soul for 3 years was now shattered by a storm of regret and pain. He hadn't just lost Lillian. He had lost her music, her dance, her laughter, and the vibrant life she had tried to bring into his world of order. And now, he had almost let the music inside his own daughter die completely. A few days later, in the living room, under the warm afternoon sun, Rosa was sitting beside Nora's wheelchair, softly humming a familiar tune. Edward stood at the threshold, not daring to enter, afraid his presence would break the peaceful moment. Rosa stopped humming and looked at Nora fondly. This melody is beautiful, isn't it? She smiled. Nora, would you like to try our dance again? The space seemed to freeze, leaving only the ticking of the grandfather clock. Edward saw Nora's lips, silent for 3 long years, begin to tremble. A sound struggled to escape, hesitant, faint, and then it came, barely a whisper, but it echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Rosa. Tears immediately streamed down Rosa's cheeks. They were tears of relief, of joy, of a promise fulfilled. She threw her arms around Nora, sobbing with happiness. Edward stood motionless at the threshold, his hands clenched into tight fists. He heard Rosa's name, not his, but there wasn't a trace of jealousy, only boundless gratitude. A single, hot tear traced a path down the cheek of the man who had seemed to be made of stone. But the greatest turning point was yet to come. That night, after Nora was asleep, Rosa found Edward in Lillian's old studio, a place he had started spending more time. He was standing quietly, gazing at his wife's paintings. I think it's time, Rosa said softly. She held out a yellowed envelope, its seal still intact. Lillian gave this to me. She told me to only give it to you when you were ready to truly listen. Edward accepted it, his hands trembling. His wife's soft, elegant script graced the paper. He sat down, the hands of the man who commanded a tech empire, now fumbling to open this final letter of love. My dearest Edward, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer beside you. Please, don't retreat into silence. I know your grief will make you build walls, and I'm afraid you will lock Nora inside them with you. Don't let your logic drown out her music. I know you will find the best specialists for her, but there are wounds that science cannot touch. For that, I have asked someone, a friend I trust implicitly, who understands the power of art and healing. This person will find you, but only when you are ready to see what is right in front of you, not just what the charts say. Trust this person, Edward. Let them guide you both. Dance with her, my love, even if it's only in your heart. All my love, Lillian. Edward finished reading, the letter trembling in his hands. He understood now. That friend was none other than Rosa. Rosa just stood there beside him. She didn't offer platitudes. Her simple presence was a safe space for his grief to unfold. A few days later, in the living room, Rosa brought out something new, a long, sea-blue silk ribbon. She handed one end to Nora. Now, we don't use our feet. We use our hands to feel, Rosa said gently. She began to move, the ribbon undulating through the air like a river. Nora, with curiosity in her eyes, tried to move with it. The ribbon became a tangible connection between them. When Rosa pulled gently, Nora's arm extended further than it ever had in physical therapy. When Rosa twirled, Nora shifted her hips slightly in her wheelchair, bracing herself. And as the ribbon lightly brushed against her foot, Edward, watching from a distance, saw his daughter's toes twitch. He stepped slowly into the room, his footsteps silent, as if afraid to break the sacred moment. He didn't go to his daughter. Instead, he moved toward the old, dust-covered record player in the corner. His hand brushed across the vinyl records Lillian had kept, settling on Claire de Lune. A soft click, and then the gentle, familiar melody of Debussy began to fill the room. Rosa and Nora both stopped, looking up at him. The ribbon went slack, resting quietly between them. Edward moved toward his daughter, the awkwardness of a man who had forgotten how to feel evident in every step. He said nothing. He simply knelt on one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. He looked at the ribbon connecting Rosa and Nora, then gently reached out and took his daughter's free hand in his. Nora's hand squeezed his in return, and just like that, the three of them formed an imperfect circle, Rosa leading the dance, Nora the heart of the melody, and Edward, the one who had finally learned how to listen. He had spent years trying to fix what was broken, only to realize that what his daughter needed was not to be fixed, but to be found. And in the journey to find Nora, he had finally begun to find himself.